You might only see them as a blur of wings, a tiny bird moving with athleticism and precision. With a remarkable ability to hover and even fly backwards, they speed from flower to flower. Their appetite for sugar seems outsized, and indeed, there are few animals that can match a hummingbird's need for energy. Ounce per ounce, hummingbirds have some of the highest metabolic rates ever measured. Within my immediate family, I have a well deserved reputation as someone with an extreme sweet tooth, but I've got nothing on the tiny but mighty hummingbird. To discuss the busy world of hummingbirds, I'm joined today by Jennifer Brown, a wildlife biologist based in California with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Jennifer, thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful.
I'm eager to learn about hummingbirds from you, and I got a ton of questions, uh, as I usually do for our guests, but I know the audience might have questions as well. So, as we're heading along during our conversation today, if you're watching at home and you want to ask Jennifer questions about hummingbirds, drop those in the chat below the live camera feed, and one of the helpful moderators from Explore.org will send those in my direction. We'll try to get to a few of those either during or after the chat. My first question for you, though, Jennifer, is to get to know you just a little bit more. How did you get your start in wildlife biology, and have you always focused on birds?
Yeah, no, I have not always focused on birds, but I had a wonderful grandfather who loved to take us out camping and see the world, even though I was an inner city kid. Didn't grow up in the greatest place, but yeah, my grandfather always made sure to get us out, like get us up in the mountains or into the woods to explore. And my father, too, he always made sure to take us to the beach, and he taught me about sea life. And so, yeah, both my grandfather and my dad had a lot of influence in how I turned out. And so, yeah, I decided that I really wanted to go into an environmental field. Um, and so, yeah, I went to junior college first, and my first ecology professor had us go out and find an animal and observe it and draw a picture of it and kind of like notice its behavior. And so my first animal that I drew was a spotted towhee. And I just thought it was so amazing. Just thought it was the most beautiful bird I had ever seen, mostly because I hadn't spent that much time before looking too closely at birds. And then, yeah, I thought its behavior was really interesting. It was just kind of scritching in the dirt, looking for critters. And so, yeah, after that, I was hooked. So, yeah, I was really lucky. And I've worked with mammals, reptiles, and fish, but most of my work throughout my career has been with birds. And I also volunteer with the UC Davis Hummingbird Health and Conservation Program on the side. And they really taught me a lot about what I know about hummingbirds.
Yeah, and I think all of us who enjoy nature can kind of think of those formative moments where maybe we had an aha, moment. And I remember seeing my first eastern towhee, where they were in my forest where I grew up in Pennsylvania, but I just never paid attention until one day in college I was hanging out with some birders and they started talking about towhees, and I was like, oh, okay, those are pretty awesome birds. So cool to hear that you had a
Yeah,
similar story. Uh,
yeah,
and
it's my gateway
hummingbirds.
bird.
Yeah, the hummingbirds, I think, can be a gateway bird for a lot of people as well. I mean, they're such amazing creatures in so many different ways, and I admire them for their athleticism. And when you think of things like their heart rate, their breathing rate, the number of wing beats per minute or per second that they experience, what do hummingbirds experience while they're flying?
Oh man, hummingbirds are amazing. They are just incredible acrobats. And like you said earlier, they can fly backwards and they can hover. It's so incredible the way they can move in the air. Um, Hummingbird vital rates vary by species. And sorry about my yelling parrot in the background. She knows it's almost time for work to end, so she wants to be let out of her cage. But yeah, North American hummingbirds, they average about 53 wing beats per second during typical flights. So that's really stinking fast. And then the amethyst wood star hummingbird has the fastest rate and can reach up to 80 beats per second during fast flights. And for heartbeat, a hummingbird's heart beats as fast as 1,200 beats per minute and as slow as 50 to 180 beats per minute on cold nights. So it's quite a drop at night as opposed to the daytime. And then as far as breathing rates go, a hummingbird's breathing rate is 250 breaths per minute. And when you compare that to starlings and pigeons, they take only 30 breaths per minute. And humans only take between 14 and 18 breaths per minute. So that's a huge difference.
It's amazing that they're able to handle that sort of activity level within their bodies and to support their energetic lifestyle. I mean, they need a lot of energy. So how are they able to fuel their muscles, including their heart, to be able to fly and behave like they do?
Yeah, it's a great question. Hummingbird diets, they vary by habitat and by season. A given species may feed primarily on flower nectar or primarily on arthropods, depending on what is available in a given habitat or season. Many hummingbirds also feed on tree sap when flowers aren't available by using holes created by other bird species, such as sapsuckers. Hummingbirds obtain sugar from flower nectar, which provides really quick energy, which they need for flight. But hummingbirds obtain protein, fat, and salt from eating insects and spiders. So yeah, pretty cool that they can take what they need when they need it.
Yeah, it's almost like a fighter jet refueling in flight. I mean, we've probably seen pictures of military planes doing that. But that's what hummingbirds are doing on the wing, and there's not too many animals that can do it like they can. And they're among the smallest of warm-blooded animals. Ruby-throated hummingbirds, those are the ones that migrate and nest in my home region in Maine. They weigh less than a nickel. And since hummingbirds are diurnal, and so they're active during the day, they have a small body size that restricts the amount of energy that they can proportionally store in their body. So I'm wondering how hummingbirds might cope with food shortages that they experience at night, and how might cold temperatures influence their behavior?
Yeah, that's really amazing. Hummingbirds, they have this neat capability. They are able to go into a state called torpor. It's TORPOR if you want to look it up. Torpor is a type of deep sleep where an animal lowers its metabolic rate. A hummingbird is able to lower its body temperature, heart rate, and breathing rate during torpor. This allows hummingbirds to use up to 50% less energy during torpor than when they are awake. So I think it's really incredible to be able to save all that energy by going into torpor. It's an incredible ability that they have.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like a daily hypothermia practically for them, and again, something that humans can't really do. And I love to think about how animals are adapted to live and survive in different ways, and utilize these different strategies that humans just can't replicate within our own bodies. Uh, let's talk now about a little bit about their migration and a little bit maybe about their daily movements. Uh, some North American hummingbirds are long distance migrators. Rufous hummingbirds, which is the little critter flying around behind me on the video, uh, they breed in as far north as Southeast Alaska, yet they overwinter in southern Mexico. Ruby-throated hummingbirds breed as far north as southern Canada, then spend the winter in Central America. So how are hummingbirds preparing for migration? What is that stage of their life like?
Yeah. So when compared to other vertebrate species, a hovering hummingbird has the fastest metabolism for its size. Hummingbirds have specialized circulatory and respiratory systems to efficiently deliver oxygen and nutrients to their flight muscles. Hummingbirds rapidly gain weight when they're preparing for migration. The weight they gain is mostly from fat, so they have to eat a lot of insects and spiders to get that fat put on their bodies. And fat is preferred because it contains double the energy that carbohydrates contain. So it's a lot more useful for migration than nectar is. And during migration, a lot of species use stopover sites. So a lot of species will travel like 20 miles in a day, and then they'll stop and rest somewhere and fuel up. But with those ruby-throated hummingbirds on the East Coast, they end up crossing over the Gulf, which is such a long way. They'll travel 500 miles just in one go. It's like an 18-hour stretch that they go without getting any fuel, which is crazy to me. Like, I can't even go that far in a car without needing a break.
And what about, as a follow up to that? What about their small size? I mean, they're tiny birds.
They
Some of the
are
smallest birds on
tiny.
Earth. So what is that size? Does that create or the lack thereof? Does that create additional challenges for them that maybe like a larger bird who also migrates might not necessarily experience?
Yeah, they have to. Well, they develop like specialized circulatory systems and a specialized respiratory system so that they could be more efficient, particularly with their fast metabolism that they have for their small size. And everything they do is just so much faster. I wish I had intended to do more research on this over the weekend before our talk to look into the details about how their size changes the way they operate during migration. But unfortunately, I ran out of time to do that.
Well, we'll wait till next time for that. So we'll save a little bit more
Okay,
info.
great.
And they one really cool thing that I read recently about hummingbirds too is that they seem to have a really keen spatial memory for places that they've previously found food. So they have a super high metabolism. They got to eat a lot. How likely are it that the hummingbird that we see at a feeder, for example, or a flower bed, would it be like the same hummingbird coming back to that site year after year potentially?
Yeah, there's a good chance it is the same hummingbird. It's really amazing. So with the UC Davis, sorry for my screaming bird, the UC Davis Hummingbird Health and Conservation group that I volunteer with, they taught me how to band hummingbirds, and they let me go out with them to band birds so that we can monitor their movements. And they also did a study using RFID tags. They're like little radio frequency tags that they track. You can track their movements anywhere you have a reader to read the tag. You can see where they were at a given moment. And so they installed these readers at feeders at people's homes who are doing the monitoring work, and found the same birds were coming back each year to the same feeders. And you could see how individuals were interacting with each other at the feeders, and males versus females, and then how also different species of hummingbirds were interacting too with different feeders. But you could see like when the birds come back from migration and when they leave for migration. And with that study, they also found that some houses with lights on at night, there's some nighttime feeding, which is really interesting.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it was super cool. But yeah, so the hummingbirds, you can definitely get return customers to your feeders. So yeah, make sure to keep your feeders maintained, or keep your plants ready. So you got something for them to come back to.
And we'll talk a little bit more about hummingbird feeders and specifically what you could put in hummingbird feeders to attract them, or flowers for your yard in just a little bit. But I did want to ask you a couple of questions about Allen's hummingbird, because that's the species that we see most often on our hummingbird camps on explore.org. And if you want to see, a nesting hummingbird right now, just go to explore.org/hummingbirds, and you can see one sitting on a nest right now. And males of this species, they don't help incubate or raise chicks, but they put a lot of work into their courtship. So for Allen's hummingbird, And hummingbirds in general, what's the courtship process like?
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. So the females get to choose their mates. So the males put on a show for the females to try and get their interest so that they'll be chosen. So usually the females are perched nearby, and then a male, if he spies a female, he'd be like, I can give you a little show and maybe it'll work out. Uh, so yeah, hummingbirds, they often put on these amazing courtship displays. Um, and different hummingbird species can have their own distinctive display that they perform. And Allen's, I've actually, it's exciting. I was able to see Allen's perform their courtship displays in one garden that I was doing banding in. It was really amazing watching because there were so many flowers in this yard that there were quite a few Allen's hummingbirds that were showing off at the same time. So I could see the different types of courtship displays that they have. So one type of display is called shuttling, where it involves flying back and forth while flashing their iridescent feathers at the female. Um, and they also, during shuttling, they can make a sound with their wings, which is really amazing that their wings can do that. And then their other type of display is a steep dive in front of the female. So they go way up high and then they drop down. And sometimes the steep dive is paired with a pendulum swing. So, like, they'll do the steep dive and then a pendulum back and forth in front of the female, which is so cool. And yeah, that makes their tail and wing feathers make a sound with that too. So like the whole time I was doing my work in this garden, like I kept hearing all of that going on behind me. It was really amazing.
And I do encourage people to try to seek that out if you have the opportunity, because it's like I guess a North American version of a bird of paradise dance. I mean that you sort of see that or birds of paradise. You know, you can go back to like BBC, Planet Earth stuff and how amazing those dances are.
Mm-hmm.
But with their flashing their feathers, their iridescent feathers, and all of the work that they do into that dance, it is quite amazing. So I definitely encourage people to seek that out if you haven't seen it. Now, the females, of course, Jennifer, they perform a tremendous amount of work to raise their chicks, and the hummingbird cams give us some great insights into that process. And earlier we discussed the importance of sugar, of course, to the survival of active hummingbirds. And nectar is really good for quick bursts of energy, but it lacks many of the fortifying elements that are necessary to build bone and muscle. So you mentioned during migration, the hummingbirds might eat, a lot of spiders or insects to try to get fat. And so what about a female hummingbird who's raising chicks? What does she feed her young so that they can grow quickly and well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they feed their young a mixture of insects, spiders, and a thickened wet material that scientists think is like a thickened nectar. But their diet stays the same while they're being fed by the female adult. Um, and this is really interesting for me too, because I used to help run a wildlife rehabilitation center where we would get hummingbird chicks in, and so we would have to feed them. So we had to research and find a special diet that would mimic their natural diet in the wild, and um, it was challenging. And we had to feed those guys every 15 minutes to keep them going. It was really amazing.
It's so much work. I can't imagine being a mother bird. I can't imagine being a mother human, um, let alone a mother bird. So yeah, I think it's just kind of incredible to watch the amount of work that they put into that. And we're going to try to get to some audience questions here in just a few moments. So if you have any for Jennifer about hummingbirds, again, drop those in the chat. We'll do our best to try to answer a few of those. Before we get to that, though, a few more questions for you, Jennifer, are just about sort of like natural history and conservation of hummingbirds. I read, this study that was published in the journal Science in 2019, and it collapse of bird numbers throughout North America. So over the last several decades, there's far fewer birds using North America now. And that 2019 science study, or in the journal Science, excuse me, estimated that North America, let's see, now hosts 3 billion fewer birds compared to the 1970s. And that's a tragic statistic. I'm wondering though how hummingbirds are doing as a group in North America.
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, when that paper came out about the loss of 3 billion birds in such a short time span, I mean, it was really eye-opening, like what we're doing to wildlife. Actually, our agency, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, has been working towards developing an effort to better conserve birds than how we've been doing in the past, and really like using that paper as a jumping off point. But yeah, regarding hummingbirds, another paper was published in 2021, so just last year. It was published in Nature, and it's called Current Contrasting Population Trends Among North American Hummingbirds. And the paper describes declines in Allen's, rufous, broad-tailed, and ruby-throated hummingbirds, some of which have been declining since 1970. However, Anna's hummingbirds, on the other hand, their populations have been increasing significantly since 1970. So it's interesting. One species is doing really well while others are declining. So it's interesting to see the differences between species. Also, my agency, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, maintains a list of birds of conservation concern, and it was just updated in 2021, and it now includes 7 hummingbird species on the list, including the Antillean mango in Puerto Rico, and then the lucifer, costas, calliope, rufous, Allen's, and broad-tailed. And one good thing to come out of this is, so that paper, it got some hummingbird experts excited to maybe bring a group together and develop a Western hummingbird conservation plan. And that has just started. So they're just in the beginning stages of starting to meet and put some plans together. But it's exciting that there's such a focus now on preserving and protecting our native bird species. So yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like it can be a mixed bag depending on, what's happening and the level of habitat that is intact for certain species and what they prefer. But there are ways that we can help birds and hummingbirds specifically. A lot of people love to feed hummingbirds. I do myself, and that's where this footage behind me came from, just from a feeder that I had a few years ago. And you can easily find hummingbird feeders for sale online and at traditional stores. And so if someone is thinking about purchasing a feeder, what do you think that they should look for?
Yeah, well, I can tell you what I do. I've tried a number of different types of feeders over the years, and I've just found that the one that's easiest to clean is probably the best one for me. The one that doesn't have too many parts and pieces to take apart to clean. So yeah, the type of feeder that I prefer, it's kind of like a saucer type, or like a cup where the lid is flat on top, and then the food is down below, like in a little cup. And yeah, because you're supposed to clean your hummingbird feeders at least every 3 days. Like, so in the winter when it's cool, you can get away with going as long as 3 days. But in the summer when it's hot, hummingbird feeders should really be cleaned every day, because mold and bacteria will grow otherwise. And I also prefer the saucer type feeders too, because the food is less likely to drip onto the ground, I've found, which that can often bring in ants and stuff. So try to avoid those guys. But yeah, I mean, whatever, different feeders work. So whatever you prefer is great.
Those are great tips, and those are lessons that I've learned the hard way.
Right, me too.
You know, if like for example, the feeder right here, this one, you know, you fill basically upside down, and then you uh, then you turn it upright, but there's no release for any air expansion in there, and that just since you can't compress liquid, when the air heats up inside of it, like at the top, it's just going to force that liquid out the bottom, and it drips, and then you have a lot of ants. I had honeybees found it, and eventually they loved it, which I don't really mind, you know, that much. But you will attract, you know, other animals if your hummingbird feeder is leaking, and yeah, make sure it's easy to clean too. That is something else that I found. I was really surprised how quickly you would start to see things like mold and mildew building up in there. So definitely look for the ones that are maybe simple and easy to clean. Uh, and a follow-up question, Jennifer, about that too is, you know, we could you put these feeders up, but what are we putting in them? What can we use to feed hummingbirds, and what should be avoided?
Yeah, so it should just be sugar and water, nothing else. I should use 1 part sugar to 4 parts water, or an easy measurement is I just use a 1/4 cup of sugar and a full cup of water, just so I can remember it better. It's important not to make the mixture too sweet, so you don't want to add additional sugar. You should just, yeah, stick with the recipe. And you also don't want to add anything that's thick or sticky, like syrup or honey or agave nectar, for example. It's just keep your straight sugar water. Also, dye and other colorants shouldn't be used either. The feeding ports and the color of the lid should be enough to attract the hummingbirds, so you shouldn't need any extra colorant.
And of course, you know, there's or feeders aren't the only way to help hummingbirds and birds in general. So what can people do to help create better habitat for birds, including hummingbirds, in their backyards and in their neighborhoods?
And that this is the fun part. I really love native plant gardening too. So for me, like birds and plants just fit right in with each other. So I'm a big native plant nerd. In California, we're really lucky because we have the California Native Plant Society with all this information on their website about different species of plants and how to grow them. But yeah, for starters, I recommend just thinking about your yard in terms of food, water, shelter, and places to raise young. So I recommend planting a variety of native plants that attract hummingbirds and other pollinators. And why native plants? Well, our native hummingbirds have evolved with these plants. And so it's important to have the plants that they recognize and know, and that they've evolved with, to be available as much as possible. Hummingbirds often prefer tube-shaped flowers. I'll just list off some of the species of flowers that I have in my yard. I have California fuchsia, manzanita, sage, and hummingbird sage is a really good one to use. Penstemon, columbine, of course, and desert willow, which is a type of tree, which is really great. However, they will also feed on non-tubular flowers, I've found as well. And they also feed from a variety of flower colors, not just red. They seem to like yellow and white and pink. So yeah, I don't have to stick with just red to attract hummingbirds. I also recommend planting other types of plants to attract insects and spiders that they can eat. So like native grasses, we have these native bunch grasses that really seem to attract insects and spiders, and the webs are really great because the hummingbirds can use the webs to help build their nests. And then, yeah, they can eat the spider when they're done taking all the webs. but, and then tall shrubs and trees also provide perches and substrate for nest building. And for native plant recommendations and nurseries, I recommend talking to your local native plant club or organization. You can also ask local birding clubs where to find native plants for hummingbirds. And then for water, I recommend a shallow or flat topped fountain for drinking and bathing. And if you don't have that, if you have a deeper fountain, you can just place rocks inside the fountain so that it provides purchase for them, and it's less deep for them.
Well, yeah, lots of different ways that we can make our yards and our gardens more wildlife friendly. And that's a process that I'm working with or working through as well at my house. So it's a work in progress, but it's fun, and it's I recommend that everyone do it. Get rid of some of your lawn and put in some plants that animals can use besides somebody sunbathing. Final question for you, Jennifer, before we get to some audience questions um, are there particular facets of hummingbird biology and ecology that you find most fascinating?
Oh my god, it's so hard to narrow it down because they're just so amazing. I guess some of the things I'm most fascinated with are that like some species can migrate over 3,000 miles in one direction. I just for something that size, it blows my mind. I'm like, I don't know if I could do that distance in a lifetime, let alone just one season. Um, I also think it's amazing how so many plants co-evolve with hummingbirds. Different hummingbirds have different beak shapes that correlate with the shape of the flower they're pollinating. And yeah, the plants benefit too because they get free pollination. All they have to provide is pollen. Um, and then I think it's incredible that they live on the edge of what's energetically possible with their fast metabolism and their small size. And of course, I think my favorite thing is just their iridescent feathers. I think it's fascinating that they create their color based on their feather structure. When the light hits them just the right way, that you get those amazing colors. So yeah, so it's hard to pick just one thing.
There's a lot to love about these tiny birds, and we do have
Mm-hmm.
a few audience questions in our queue here. The first one that's in the list here, Jennifer, is about the lifespan of a hummingbird. What is their lifespan?
That's a really great question. I don't know, but some of our recaptured birds, they've been like 12, 13 years old, which I think is really amazing. And I think I remember seeing one report of like a 15-year-old hummingbird. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm sorry, I don't know like the upper limit for sure. But yeah, I do remember from the banding reports I've seen that like between 12 and 15 years.
That's much longer lived than I think most of us would suspect. I mean, when you look at a rodent of
Right?
equivalent size, they don't live anywhere near that
I
long. So
know.
yeah, so really another amazing aspect of their biology and life history. Uh, Next question
Mm-hmm.
here is about a little bit of the dancing and the behavior, the courtship behavior of hummingbirds. This person writes, the scariest thing I see at my house is a male hummingbird dance. He goes up about 75 feet and dives straight down at a very high speed, then swoops back up when he gets close to the ground. What scares me is sometimes he dives all the way down to the top of a roof and barely misses hitting it. Have any male hummingbirds been harmed when performing this dance? I don't know if you've uh, witnessed anything like that, a hummingbird getting injured by that flight dance. But yeah, what do you think?
That's another really great question. I've seen that too. Actually, just this weekend, I was outside with our dog and I was watching a male Anna's hummingbird do that. Like, he goes way up in the air and then does that steep dive that with that J at the end, and makes that sound with its tail feathers. And I'm so amazed at how close they come to hitting things. Like this hummingbird, it was almost hitting the roof of my house too. I've never heard of injuries associated with that type of behavior, but I I imagine that there's always that chance. So I wouldn't be surprised to find out that a bird has gotten injured doing their display, because I don't know, they might be more focused on the female than they are their own safety.
I would also suspect, though, that if that did happen, that male probably wouldn't be so successful at courting females. So maybe whatever genes he had, wouldn't be passed on to the next generation. So maybe that's where we
Yeah,
would get to weed it out eventually. But
right.
Jennifer, that brings up that thought, though, or that question about male hummingbirds and potentially striking things. And we know that birds strike into windows and buildings, for example, is a huge issue, and that's one of the reasons why, or one of the major, human-caused killers of birds throughout North America. So have you taken any measures, in any of the buildings or places that you've worked to help reduce bird strike on windows, or do you have any advice on how people can do that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, those reflective surfaces. Unfortunately, I mean, it looks like they're flying into the sky when they're really flying into a window, uh, or they'll reflect the trees in your yard. So yeah, breaking up that reflection is really the best way to help minimize impacts from window collisions. So there's if you want to get creative, you can find stickers often at bird feeding stores where little window decals, they have a UV reflection. You can put those stickers all over your window, but you really need to the best thing is to make a grid using tape, which I don't doesn't look necessarily the most attractive, but you want to have a small area of space so that they think they can't fly through. So, and if you want something that's more attractive, there's some companies now. Actually, there's a number of companies that make whole window decals where they have like stripes. And they're really faint, so it's not that obvious to the human eye, but the birds can see them. And actually, one company I worked with, I was actually banding another species, a tricolored blackbirds. I'd been monitoring this breeding colony for a number of years near my house, and a company built this big building with these huge windows, and a lot of my study birds were colliding with their windows and dying. And so I worked with them, and they found a company to install these big stickers, like full window stickers for this huge building. And the collision stopped after that. So it's really amazing. But yeah, the stripes on the window decals are really close together, because they basically see the stripes as a barrier to being able to fly through. So the stripes have to be pretty close together because, depending on the species that you're trying to prevent from flying into the window. But hopefully that made sense.
It does, yeah, yeah. And I've seen a variety of resources online too. So if you're concerned about that, look it up and see what your best option for that might be. We'll get to I think a few more questions here before we conclude our broadcast. Several more have come in recently. The next one here is about finding hummingbird nests. So this person writes, I have a few hummingbirds in my yard regularly. They feed all year round. I hunt for a nest, and I have not found one. How can I spot a hummingbird nest? And are nests usually close to where they're feeding?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I've never found a hummingbird nest myself either. I've always had other people point them out to me. um, and yeah, so they can feed, and I mean they're so fast. They fly so quickly. They don't necessarily have to stay close to their nest. I mean, they stay relatively close to their nests, but they can still go a little ways out, and then come back, and yeah, not have missed much time incubating. So yeah, as far as spotting one, yeah, I guess I would just keep watching to see if I can find a hummingbird flying into a particular shrub or a tree or something, and then go and search in there. But yeah, it takes a lot of monitoring to be able to observe and see where they go. And actually, I take it back. I did find one nest. It was at my office. I forgot about that. It was pre-COVID when we were back at the office. But yeah, that was really amazing. I just happened to see this female fly into a tree at the right time, and I was able to find her nest.
The only hummingbird nest that I have ever found was purely by accident. Really, I was watching a junco fly near some trees, and I saw all of a sudden I saw a hummingbird just get really agitated and start chasing the junco. So that was like the light bulb moment. I was like, oh, I wonder if there's something over there because there weren't any flowers in the near vicinity. And after just a few more minutes of observing, I was able to see the hummingbird flying back to its nest. So sometimes you can pay attention to the behavior of a hummingbird around other birds too, and or other wildlife, and that might tip you off. So they're
Yeah,
so
that's a
hard. They're
great
so well
suggestion.
camouflaged. And at hummingbird feeders and also at flowers, we see sometimes competition between hummingbirds and other animals. Next question here, somebody was wondering about yellow jackets. My hummingbird feeder also attracts yellow jackets. So I've observed them chasing off hummingbirds. Do you have any comments on that? I guess that's pretty open-ended there, but yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, we've got yellow jackets in our yard too, and we put up one of those yellow jacket traps, it's helped somewhat. But sometimes I'll move the hummingbird feeder to just an entirely different part of the yard, hoping to deter the yellow jackets, and then hang the trap up near where the old hummingbird feeder used to be. Um, but yeah, and same with the bees too. Sometimes bees really can have a go at the feeder, and sometimes if you've got a lot of bees at a feeder, sometimes that can deter hummingbirds. Um, so yeah, I usually end up moving my feeder and then putting up a trap.
And somebody was wondering about enemies or predators of hummingbirds. So do they have any natural enemies or predators? They're so fast, I think it would be difficult for something to catch them on the wing, but I don't know.
I know. Yeah, um, praying mantises actually will eat hummingbirds, and
Oh,
I
okay.
didn't believe this until I found one on my feeder at home, and it was a huge praying mantis. It was like, I want to say it was like 3.5 inches long, and it was standing on the feeder, and it was like right over the port so it was like ready to strike when a hummingbird came to feed. Um, so yeah, definitely praying mantises, and also I've read that some mammals, well, and definitely house cats too. They're pretty fast. And when hummingbirds are first coming out of torpor early in the morning, they move really slow, and so they can be a lot easier to catch in the early morning too, because their muscles, they're still warming up, and they're still getting their body ready to move again after being in partial hibernation all night. Um, so yeah.
And one final is about, I guess, our role in hummingbird conservation. This person writes, to what extent are hummingbirds dependent on the care by humans, and which part of their lives are, in free nature? So, we talked a lot about, hummingbird feeders and things like that. So what do you think about that? How dependent are some of these individual hummingbirds on those feeders? And if you take them away, for instance, how would that hummingbird fare?
Yeah. Sorry, my daughter just got home. um, yeah, I think I remember seeing a study a while back that looked at that, and maybe I'm thinking about seed feeders rather than hummingbird feeders. But with the seed feeders, it was found that even if you take the feeders away, like the birds are still able to survive on their own. I would assume the same is true of hummingbirds. And actually, I should mention one downside of feeders is that you're bringing birds together in a much higher concentration than they normally would be. So there's a greater chance of disease transmission from one bird to the next. Um, so that is, I guess there's pluses and minuses to having feeders, which is why I put a lot of native plants in my yard. So they're hopefully, yeah, not going just to my feeder, but also going to natural sources as well.
And earlier in the broadcast, you did mention that you were volunteering or had volunteered with a hummingbird program through UC Berkeley. Did you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, it's at UC Davis, and
Oh, okay, excuse me.
it's run. Yeah, no, it's all good. It's yeah, so it's at UC Davis, and it's run out of their veterinary school program. So the person who manages the program, she's a dear friend, and a wonderful veterinarian. Her name is Lisa Tell. But yeah, she runs the program on a very small budget, but they do a lot of really cool research. Yeah, I think it was amazing, the RFID project I talked about earlier. Just these tiny little tags that are like the size of a grain of rice, are inserted in the skin on the back, and it's just amazing. Like the birds were fine, like they didn't seem bothered by the trackers at all, and they did really well. And we captured them a year or two later, like they still look really healthy and no effects, and yet we were able to get all this great information from them. And yeah, they've done a lot of work looking at avian pox at feeders, and also looking at the effects of pesticides, um, and things on hummingbirds. So it's really amazing all the work that they do. Um, so yeah, I really enjoy volunteering there.
It sounds like a great experience, and it's been wonderful talking with you today, Jennifer, about hummingbirds. Hummingbirds, they rank among the most athletic and amazing of all creatures. And Jennifer, thanks so much for sharing your insights about them today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been really fun.
And my guest today was Jennifer Brown, a wildlife biologist based in California with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. If you want to learn more about hummingbirds, there's a ton of great resources on the internet. A couple that Jennifer did mention was Western Hummingbird Partnership. You can find them at westernhummingbird.org, the Hummingbird Conservation Network at savehummingbirds.org. She also mentioned the native plant societies. Check those out. Your cooperating extension service also can have a lot of great resources. And then if you want to watch hummingbirds, of course, anytime, go to explore.org/hummingbirds or go to bellahummingbird.com, our partner for that camera. And my name is Mike Fitz with explore.org. Thanks for joining me today. And remember, as we like to say here at Explore, never stop learning.